that event also took place in the presence of all the people of Israel. So I'm now beginning to see that the commandment of son by Joshua 2 happened in the presence of all the people of Israel. Now, water gushed out. Don't we think that commandment like this or decree like this in the presence of people might also be why God honored these things or answered these things? I want to explain. You know, Yoruba people used to say, if an elder does something that is wrong, there is a way. If you want to correct the elder, you will not correct him in the presence of the younger ones, because you will consider that that elder will lose his respect. So you don't abuse an elder or correct an elder sternly where there are children, in the presence of children. So I'm just looking at this, that could this also be, especially considering the fact that God wanted these people to lead the people of Israel to the promised land. If in the presence of all the people of Israel, he rubbished or disobeyed Moses, and Moses, after he had fumbled like that, as we may so say, and the water will not come out, the people may lose their respect for Moses and say, you see now, that's how, and that means God doesn't love you, and you have been saying this. And subsequently, whatever Moses said then might not carry much weight. And Joshua here too, in the presence of all the people, if he commanded this kind of a thing and nothing happened, the people might lose their respect for Joshua. And because of that, when next say, yes, God say, let's go here now, they may say, no. That was how you commanded. You said there should be this thing and nothing happened. So I'm thinking aloud this time. It's not as if I'm concluding. We are looking at events as this. While there was no statement that God was not comfortable with that which Joshua said, we are trying to look at it, this commanding God. And we also made reference to Elijah too, how that he also decreed, lest there be famine and the likes, there will be no rain and the likes, and there was no rain. So all of these are in the Bible. But because many of us have taken sides, and the way we relate with God have always been from some of these things we found from the Bible. Now, for some of us who might probably join this group maybe recently, you might not have been privileged to know the theme of this Bible studies we are doing. We call it Reasoning with the Master. That is the shortened form of it, Reasoning with the Master. Now, it now occurs to us that it is not just reasoning with the Master, but reasoning with the Master as in the beginning. Let me explain what the beginning is. We understand that God has several things in mind, original thing he had in mind from the beginning, but that with time, those things changed. Some of his servants made those things to change. People made those things to change with time. And the changes were reported in the Bible too. The changes were recorded in the Bible too. So many of us, when we pick the Bible and we are not careful to know what was God's intention in the original, we learn from these changes too, and we consider them to be perfect will of God too. I don't know whether I'm communicating. And I used to like to cite some examples of some of those things that changed. One of it is that we have learned before in Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20 around verse 18. How that God was the one who said he wanted to talk to the people. And the people gathered. But when they began to see the blasting, the earthquake, and all of this, people said, God, we don't think we can hear you. No, we cannot hear you. Talk to Moses. We'll be hearing through Moses. And generation after that, we were not hearing God, but they were hearing Moses. Now, the generation thereafter, who were hearing God and not Moses, will ordinarily think that that was how God ordained it from the beginning. But it was not so. God had something in mind, but man said, no, we don't want that. Give us something else. Now, we also used to refer to the occasion of the choice of king. How that originally God said, I don't want king. Israel don't have king. Let me really continue to be your king. So they had longed for having king after the manner of all the nations around them. They had longed for this. They had requested for it. But God had always said, no, no. In the days of Gideon, they requested for king. They even wanted Gideon to be their king. But Gideon declined and said, well, I won't be your king. I will not be your king. Let God be your king. So we observe that later in the days of Samuel, they placed that request again because they just wanted a king. And they God gave them a king, and they had a king, and they continued to have a king from thenceforward. So those of us and the generation who grew to meet Israel having kings will think that yes, it had always been the will of God that they will have king. That we can even be reading from the Bible that God will say, this king is good, this king is better, this king is fine, this king is my heart, and the likes. And we have learned before that no matter how good any king might be in Israel, the point still remains that it was never the original plan of God. Now, the building of the temple too is another practical example. God has said again and again, don't build temple for me. I don't want temple. I don't dwell in a house built by hand. But with time, when man continued and persisted, they built temple for him. Some generation came to meet temple already built. And that generation may be tempted to believe that it was normal thing, a usual thing for people to build temple for God, which many of us also grew to meet. You observe that I used to emphasize this thing again and again because I want it to get registered in our minds. And what I'm driving at is that there are a lot of things we find in the Bible which were not original plans of God. During the earthly ministry of Jesus, several things that God himself related with and probably condoned, when such questions were raised, you will hear Jesus saying, well, Moses asked me to do this, but in the beginning it was not so.